Alrighty, it's your boy Zxous, and we're back with another Goddess of Victory Nikke video. And in today's video, we're going to be doing the, or I guess ranking Neon on the birth 3 tier list after her buff. So we've already done this video when she didn't have a buff, but recently she got buffed, and obviously, I think her buff did make somewhat of a change to her, so we're going to be going over it. Now I think Pradwin, which usually, yeah, they didn't edit it, so give me a second to find out, find the buffs. Alrighty, so here are the buffs. But before we get into that, into all of this stuff, make sure you guys subscribe and like. We are like 110, I think 120 subs away from 4K. So if you are new here, it's sub because your boy puts out all the content you could ever ask for. So it's free. Let's try to get 20 likes. So yeah, they buffed her up, not like a massive kit buff, but just her burst skill, which was somewhat of a kit buff because before her buff, we were never going to use her burst skill because you would end up doing less damage when using her burst skill than using her normal attack, right? So essentially, like for the people who still don't understand, if I was to use her burst skill, I would do less damage in that 7-second time span than if I was to just continue doing normal attacks in the same time span, right? So if I was doing normal attacks, I'd do more damage basically before her buff. Now they buffed her numbers up by a big margin, right? From at level 1, 6.5 to 19.5, right? That's 13% increase. And at level 10, it goes from 11 to 33%. That's a 12% increase. So it's a massive increase. And on top of, you still have the deal, like whatever percentage of final attack as additional damage when fighting a fire cold, but this part didn't get buffed. So this was still like, what is it? 6.5 all the way up to like 11% at level 10, right? This stays the same, but only this part got buffed. So I want to say the buff did make a difference, of course, because it did give you access to her first skill again, because we're able to use her burst now, right? Her burst definitely is usable now. I would say with this buff, you can use her burst skill. But the thing is, I honestly think that after testing, she just isn't good enough for bosses, which is so weird because her first skill is like something that only affects a boss, right? And I don't know, and let me know in the comments down below, but I believe this strong element thing is just weak, right? But then when I think of strong element, I'm thinking the character that comes to mind is D, right? If you guys don't know, D is another character with a strong element, but D ends up performing, right? D does her job against Modernia quite well, right? Because I guess D just has a massive one, right? What, 91% on top of the 46%, on top of the additional 42 to parts. Like, D does massive damage when you get all this going, right? But Neon's is just the 60%. But then when you stack it with Mary, he's also giving like an additional like 60% or something like that. I think it's like less than 60% for her. But even when you have Mary giving you all that additional stuff on top of the damage part, on top of the, fire code and everything like that, she still barely does damage. Now, I've tested her in a mob settings, right? And I've tested her in PV, or like a 1v1. Now, when it comes to her and mobs, then she will start to perform, right? Because they also increased the explosion range of the burst skill, right? Expanded the explosion range of the burst skill, right? So now it hits more enemies, it goes farther and stuff like that. So against mobs, it's gonna be good, right? Because numbers are gonna look high. You're hitting so much more, you're doing all this stuff. But against a 1v1, for some reason, her against a boss, she just doesn't do damage, which is so weird. Now I'm not gonna ask Nikke to buff her up again. They've tried. I didn't even care for Nikke to get Neon to get a buff. I didn't care for her to get a buff. I just wanted them to go and check if her coding was right, because her numbers just don't add up to her kit, right? Literally, it does not add up to her kit. And this is not a character you should invest into whatsoever. But for her to do no damage against a boss, a fire boss especially, is a bit embarrassing. And you can see that she's clearly meant for Nihilister, right? Because they literally specifically say expanded the explosion range of the burst skill Hydro shot, but that part is just in general. But then they use the example of hits all part against Nihilister, right? Chatterbox is another 5. Like, they do this for a lot. She's for Nihilister, right? She's for Nihilister / Chatterbox. D is for Modernia. Sakura's for Train. Like, they've have characters like these where they're just assigned to one specific boss. Now, this character actually expands out of that because this is her role. Her role is for fire enemies and fire bosses, clearly. So just fire enemies in general, right? Where D is really just going against Modernia, all right? Because her thing is like when bosses appear and stuff like that. For Neon's here, it's just fire enemies and fire bosses. So for you to not do any damage against a fire-coded boss, even after your buff, is a bit embarrassing. And it's like, yeah, she does do quite like some numbers, at least higher than what she was doing before when it comes to fire mobs, like fire enemy mobs. But it's still not something that I would choose over. Like, there's so many characters who still do better somehow than her in her best situation, where she has type advantage, strong element, and then all this extra stuff, right? And this stacks, right? It's not like, oh, we use her burst skill once, or we don't even have to use her burst skill. We just have to enter a burst 3 stage. It's not even like, oh, we use it the first time, the 20% doesn't do it, and we quit. No, we literally sit there and get all 3 buffs stacked up, the 60%. And it's just, it doesn't do any numbers. Like, it's so weird. So I don't know. The first part, it's cool, but again, it still doesn't do any numbers as well, right? This is what? Less than 40-something%. I think Dorothy, actually, if we pull up Dorothy, I'm pretty sure Dorothy, when she lands her last bullet in her transform state, still somehow gives more than that. 50%, right? And then D is another character who just gives it 40% when you use to attackers only when you use her burst skill. So it's just weird, right? And honestly, I think she does go from D to like low C. I think we can move her up 1 because, again, against fire mobs, she's doing good. Against fire enemy bosses, it's not really that much of a change, honestly. It really isn't, honestly. But against fire mobs, you could quite see the massive difference in that. When you use her burst skill, it's a big jump, actually. All right, because now she's hitting and stuff like that. She's actually doing numbers against fire mobs, but this is not a character that you need for fire mobs. The only reason why I would even tell somebody to summon for this character is, especially now, is for the possibility of element towers. Is that something confirmed? No, that hasn't even ever been leaked, right? There was no talks about no like element tower and stuff like that, so I can't really tell you guys that is happening. But I do think that Neon probably goes from the D tier to the low C tier. But it's not that much of a, like, she went from ass to mid, like barely reached the mid category. She went from ass to trash, maybe. Let's say that she went from ass to trash, right? I'd say B is like mid tier. No, I'd say C is mid tier, D is trash, B is okay, S is, oh, let me move Noir as well. Let me move her up as well. I'm gonna put her at like here. Right, I moved Noir as well. I forgot I have to do that as well. But yeah, I think honestly this is where I'm going to place these characters. You guys let me know what you think. I still think even after her buff Neon is still quite yikes, but that's just my opinion, of course, and I think it's everybody else's opinion, to be honest. But let me know what you guys think. It's your boy Zxous, and I'll see you guys next one. I'm out. Peace.